Hello everyone, there's been a new mid-season patch which has changed a lot of heavy weapon DPS values as well as a few other things. So of course, I had to do what I always do every single patch when something like this happens. I got to force my friends to help me get a Templar checkpoint and slave away for a couple hours. So what did we find? Well, there's a couple new changes you should be aware of. So overall, if you just want the overall picture of how the meta has changed this patch, it's not that big, right? It's not that big. Heavy GLs, anywhere you would already use heavy GLs, they're even better now. And in some cases where rockets had the advantage in total damage because of Galley, now you're using rockets explicitly for DPS. You're only using them for fireteam DPS, or because they're very good in stuff like GMs where those wolf packs are just really potent at clear. Now, if you're in like a low man scenario or you're doing solo damage, heavy GLs are much more viable. They have much higher total damage than even like, a bait and switch Apex Predator or like a Cold Comfort with bait and switch as well with 10 in reserves, even with Wolfpack rounds included. So heavy GLs have insanely high total damage now, and we're going to talk about why. So first of all, reserve changes, right? Breach heavy GLs, rapids now get 35, depending on inventory size, it can fluctuate a bit, but in the ones that I saw, 35, and then 29 for adaptives, which is insane. That's like a huge bump up in total damage. Just to kind of draw the point across here, previously, right, if you go to a heavy GL with bait and switch, so take a look at this row that I'm highlighting right here, 2.87 million total damage, okay? Now, before, this number was actually worse than Apex Predator with, just 9 rockets, right? Now it's even better than Cold Comfort, and Cold Comfort has 10 rockets because it's an aggressive. So total damage is no longer a concern, even with wolf packs involved and optimal conditions included. Heavy GLs have higher total damage definitively than rockets do at this point. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, heavy waveframes, compressed waveframes, whatever you want to call them, dimensional hypotrichoid, as well as the hullabaloo from this Guardian Games year. They have a lot higher reserves as well with 27. I would have liked to see like a little bit more, given that they specialize in ad clear. Wave heavy GLs also got a 40% width buff. If you want to take a look at what that looks like, I can show you it, or you could just, you could just look for it yourself. It's not very impressive, is what I'm trying to say. 40% is not very big numerically, and in game, it's like a fatter forbearance, so not that big. The thing that did surprise me though was that wave heavy GLs actually are not horrible for DPS now. They're kind of in the same place that caster frames are, and caster frames, kind of poetically, also got a buff this patch. But caster frames and wave heavy GLs are kind of in this place where they both do like okay damage. They do like 85 to 90% of optimal damage compared to better archetypes, but there's also like no reason you would ever use them, right? Like why would you use a wave heavy GL for boss DPS when you can just use a normal GL? And why would you use a caster frame sword for boss DPS when you can just use like an adaptive sword or like a normal sword? So they're both like surprisingly more competitive than I expected, and I'll show you what I mean in just a second. But yeah, we're going to leave that for when I talk about DPS changes. For now, we're going to talk about total damage. Parasite now gets 17 total reserves when you have 3 solar reserves on 17 parasites. I don't do total damage testing for Parasite because it's obviously not designed for total damage, but that actually is such a huge increase that you can maybe even get away with using this in something like a GM or like roam content where you want to just nuke mini bosses over and over. Like 17 is pretty insane. So, that's pretty big. Prospectors bumped up to 35. Deathbringer and Gjallarhorn were respectively, and Dragon's Breath as well, were all respectively bumped up by 2 because in game they are coded as precisions or high impacts or whatever. So Deathbringer's at 11, Gjallarhorn's at 12, Dragon Breath is at 12. Dragon's Breath now is like, I think, the king of total damage for exotic weapons. Yeah, it has like 4.6 million total damage, assuming you space out all your shots evenly and you embed the rocket in the right place on a boss's hitbox. It does insane total damage, but again, Dragon's Breath kind of fills the same niche as it always has. It's basically just a solo weapon. Truth also has 11 in the mag, or not in the mag, 11 in reserves. I don't think anyone cares though, but thought I'd note that. And Anarchy with 3 arc reserves now reaches 28 total reserves, which brings it above what it had before with no reserves. So Bungie is slowly walking back the nerfs that they did to Anarchy. As far as I'm concerned, when I checked, Anarchy didn't get a DPS increase, so the detonation, impact, all those buffs to GLs across the board did not affect Anarchy. But I wouldn't be surprised if Anarchy one day got a damage buff, because even if it gets a damage buff, I don't think it's worth using. So the era of kind of special weapon DPS has kind of passed us for the most part. Today, you know, we are mostly talking about heavy GLs. We're talking about rockets. We're talking about, you know, whatever else there may be, Dragon's Breath, whatever. Okay, so that's it for total damage. Now let's talk about DPS changes. So this is kind of the single tab where we talk about, you know, reserves, total damage. We're also going to talk about the DPS column now. So first up, breach heavy GLs actually lost a little bit of damage. So what Bungie did is I did a little math equation before the changes came out, and I theorized that all heavy GLs with spike grenades would lose DPS by like 1%. Like damage per shot would go down by 1%. And I was right. They're down by 1%. It's insignificant, completely insignificant. But if you don't have spike grenades on your heavy GL, it's no longer a big deal because those got brought up, right? Anything that doesn't have spike got brought up. So it's still worth it to use spike because you can use backup mag swapping to proc max Envious. But you can get away with using mini frags or augmented or really whatever you want. You know, at this point, you can use whatever you want. It's basically like not having impact casing on a rocket, which is, you know, an apt comparison. And, you know, a lot of people don't really care if they don't have impact casing on like a cold comfort. If it has like Envious bait, it's not the end of the world. So it is what it is. Okay, so that's heavy GL damage. Wave frame heavy GL damage per shot went up by 10%, I believe, or was it 20? I think it was 20. I think I had my numbers wrong earlier. Yeah, I think I should change. It was 20%. So in the TWID, it did say 20%. I did some testing and it showed 10%, but I think I was comparing against a Vorpal roll of dimensional. So I think it's actually 20%. So let's talk about waveframe heavy DPS, heavy waveframe DPS. If we actually filter by GLs here, right? So I'm going to filter by GLs, and then we look at DPS 2, right? And then let's ignore anything with like, or no, actually we can compare Cascade to Cascade. You can see here, right, that the actual DPS of the archetype itself, right, is actually not that big. So if we go to like 239, 329 over 225 over, you know, 728, the difference between an adaptive heavy GL and a heavy wave GL is only around 6% in DPS. Now the total damage is kind of pitiful on the heavy wave, but this is surprisingly close. I did not expect them to take an ad clear kind of GL and make it almost competitive for heavy DPS. So it's not bad, right? I'm not saying you should go out and roll a hullabaloo, especially because it doesn't have any really good damage perks besides Cascade, which is very situational. But it's cool, I guess, you know. It has Volt Shot and Chain, which we've talked about in the previous video. So I guess if you want an ad clear wave heavy GL, you know, that's nice, I guess. What else we got? Diris. Okay, so Diris got a damage buff, right? They were saying they buffed its impact by 50%, which by my math, from my calculations on the spreadsheet, damage per shot has gone up by 15%. The fire rate has also gone down to 0, or up technically, to 0.65 seconds every shot. I believe prior it was like 0.72 or something. I don't remember. It was something like that. So I think Bungie has kind of kept with their promises. Their numbers are accurate. And if we go down to Diris here, I don't remember what the previous number is, but the DPS has increased a little bit. That being said, it still does, if we look at the per shot damage, right? Diris does around 40k per shot. If we look at Wilder Flight, which is here with Spike Grenades and Frenzy, does around 76k per shot. So unfortunately, Diris is still pretty much not relevant for swap DPS. It would be really nice if it was, because, you know, it can fire indefinitely. You don't need to use autoloading or anything. But as things stand, it's pretty bad, right? And its sustained DPS is also like pretty bad. So you know, Diris is not looking too hot in terms of like boss DPS. In terms of like PvE builds, like general roam content, I don't think it's gonna change much at all either. But you know, I could be wrong. But we're here to talk about DPS. Okay, next up we have Parasite damage. So I didn't expect this, but someone in my chat informed me that, you know, Parasite obviously doesn't have spike nades, and it got the global buff to grenade damage. So it has like a 6 to 9% damage increase, which is really nice. Of note, actually, in the swap DPS tab, if you take a look over here, Parasite used to be second on this list. It is now first. It does more DPS than pre-popping a Celestial Nighthawk Goldie. So if you pre-pop a Celestial Nighthawk Goldie and you instantly shoot a boss the second it goes unimmune, Parasite still does higher DPS than that. So, you know, pretty impressive. I don't know why. I didn't think Parasite needed a buff, but sure, go for it, whatever. The gap between Parasite and Overture widens, I suppose. Prospector also got a 3% damage buff per grenade, so that's cool, I guess. Precision rocket damage, by my math, 5.5%. I did calculations and I checked the health bar and everything. It's accurate, so they did in fact boost it from minus 10% to minus 5%, so that's good. Caster frame heavy damage went up by 20%. So like I was mentioning earlier, caster frame swords are actually, well, I wouldn't call them competitive. but they're not horrible, I guess. They're kind of in the same place as heavy wave frames are. So if we go ahead and look at caster frames here, 120k DPS, right? This is with surrounded. And if we compare it to, for example, Bequest with surrounded, Bequest does like 138k. So it's actually not horrible. It does outdamage Lament now, but it does require surrounded. I'm not saying you should use a caster sword, just to be clear. I'm not saying you should use a caster sword. The total damage is still very pitiful. But you know, it does okay damage. I don't know. Caster frames really need some sort of like splash damage or piercing effect, or I don't know, like a bigger blast radius to really make them shine more. But you know, I guess caster frames are better now. I don't know. Caster frames need a paradigm shift, not a numbers change. Okay, bait and switch got changed from 35 to 30%. That really didn't affect anything. This is overall, like, assuming you're only using your heavy weapon, right? 35 to 30% is like, what is it? Let me check actually. It's just 1.35, or actually we should say 1.3 over 1.35, right? So it's like a 4% change in total damage, which is very unnoticeable, very noticeable. I don't think there's any, Destiny's not the type of game where kills are extremely sensitive for the most part, so I don't think anyone's gonna feel this, I don't think anyone's gonna care. Bait and switch weapons are still, for the most part, the best, because very easy to proc, not like surrounded, and of course, you know, very, very long buff duration as well. Explosive light. So I want to talk about this. I had a theory that explosive light would get a stealth buff because technically explosive light only buffs the explosive portion of a heavy grenade launcher shot. I'm not talking about rockets. I'm talking about specifically heavy GLs. And because heavy GLs got their damage distribution changed so that impact damage is decreased and explosion damage is increased, explosive light got a stealth buff from 44% to around 50%, right? Which is nice. That doesn't really move the needle on anything, but it does make explosive light heavy GLs have a little bit more burst damage, I suppose, which could be good in some like speedrunning cases where you want to kill a boss in like one mag or something. That's an option. There you go. Okay, and finally we have the Envious Assassin nerf. So Envious Assassin got nerfed. It was confirmed that the bugged interaction where you can double proc it is intended, but now the max you can get is, I believe, a tripling of your mag size. So if your heavy GL can fit 7 in the mag, you can overflow it to 21. Right? And I've updated this entire spreadsheet. So this spreadsheet initially did not have Envious Assassin bug accounted for, and now I have it accounted for. So anything with Envious Assassin on the spreadsheet, I hope I haven't missed anything. There's a lot of stuff here, obviously. I've changed it to be accurate. So for example, this guy right here, Cataphract with a depth backup mag and mag swapping can achieve a 24 in the mag. So I just updated all of them to account for that. Okay, additions. Burning Maul got changed. Not like in-game, but I changed the value in the abilities tab because I think I had a bad value there earlier. I got a good test on Templar today, and it's like 566k. Does around the same damage, or sorry, 577k. Does around the same damage as a Blade Barrage, just takes way longer to pop. Okay. What else we got? Arcane Needle. Yeah, Arcane Needle was like not in the spreadsheet for some reason, so I added it. There you go. Pretty low damage. That is what it is. Apparently does around the same damage as a Frenzied Blade with no buffs. Speaking of Frenzied Blade, finally, I removed the 1-2 punch 2 Frenzied Blade combo in the swap tab. So before there used to be Frenzied Blade 2 slashes, now it just says 1 slash, because thanks to the 1-2 punch changes, you cannot do 2 melees with 1 shotgun shot or 1-1-2 punch proc. It's not like a timer anymore, it just goes away when you use your melee. So that is that. And finally, before I leave you guys, quick swapping is patched. If you didn't see my Twitter post, quick swapping is now patched. Which means if you're a div swapper, sucks to suck. If I was gonna make a video actually on testing different quick swap rotations, but I guess that's canned now. So thanks, I guess, Bungie. You know, I was kind of excited for that, but it's kind of whatever. I don't really expect anything in the meta to be extremely groundbreaking and shift given these patch notes and what I've read so far. I will continue to do some testing if anything interesting comes up, and I'll keep you guys updated. But for now, that's pretty much it. Heavy GLs are just, you know, stronger. Heavy wave GLs are brought up a little bit. Caster frames brought up a little bit. Bait and switch nerf, inconsequential. Envious nerf, mostly inconsequential. And yeah, that's basically it. Also, Balladors got changed, and yeah, I changed some of that, but most of you don't care about that, so whatever. I'll leave you be. Yeah, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.